He was the billionaire CEO who couldn't keep an assistant longer than a week. Edward Harrington's standards were legendary, razor sharp, merciless, impossible. One wrong font, one misplaced comma, and you were gone. To him, fear was the only way to lead. Then came Charlotte Pierce. She was late to her interview. She dropped her papers in front of him. She had no Ivy League degree, no polished pedigree. By all accounts, she should have been dismissed before her first day ended. So, why did he give her a chance? And more importantly, why did she stay? This is not just the story of a ruthless man softened by love. It's the story of two people carrying heavy shadows, an empire built on fear, and a woman fighting for her mother's care. It's about mistakes that could ruin careers, choices between security and conscience, and the question that haunted them both: can standards survive if they are tempered with mercy? What would you do? Fight back against a man like Ned Harrington, or walk away? Stay with us to find out. And if you believe in stories that touch the heart and spark reflection, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe before we begin. By the time the elevator doors opened, the 12th assistant's desk sat empty, her nameplate already removed. Edward Harrington IV. Ned, the few who dared use his nickname, stepped onto the 42nd floor of Harrington and Row Media. The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and burnt coffee, and the click of his leather shoes echoed across the marble floor. Employees scattered down hallways or buried their faces in screens as if hiding behind glowing glass could protect them from his notice. It was the same every morning. Fear moved faster than the elevator. Ned adjusted his cufflinks, sterling silver etched with the Harrington crest, and glanced at the vacant desk outside his office. A week ago, it had belonged to a bright young graduate with a resume full of honors. She had lasted 9 days before leaving in tears. The desks had become revolving doors, each nameplate swapped as quickly as magazines on a rack. Maggie Cole, the company's chief financial officer, appeared from the corner, carrying her usual black coffee. Where Ned was sharp edges, Maggie was steady ground. Her gaze followed his toward the empty desk. 12 in a row, she said quietly. At this pace, we'll run out of candidates before the holidays. Ned didn't slow. If people can't handle the standards here, they shouldn't sit at that desk. Standards are one thing, Maggie replied, falling into step beside him. Bleeding morale is another. You can't run a newsroom like a battlefield forever. He didn't answer. Inside his office, sunlight poured across glass walls and onto a desk free of dust, free of clutter, free of life. He liked it that way. Precision was armor. Still, Maggie's words lingered. He knew the staff whispered about his impossible expectations, but what they called cruelty, he called responsibility. Mistakes in their business weren't small, they were printed, bound, and read across the country. His father had taught him that one error in ink lasted longer than memory. A soft knock pulled him from thought. Maggie leaned in. There's one more interview this morning. A walk-in. Resume looks thin, but we're desperate. Ned sighed. Send her in. The door creaked open, and Charlotte Pierce stepped through. She was 35, a little flushed from the cold wind outside, her auburn hair escaping from a loose knot. In her arms, she clutched a folder so tightly the edges bent. As she crossed the room, the folder slipped, papers fanning out across the polished floor. For a moment she froze, mortification rising in her cheeks. Then she knelt quickly, gathering each page with hands that trembled but refused to quit. Ned's voice was cool, an audition in clumsiness. Is that part of your presentation? Charlotte lifted her head, meeting his eyes with steady green ones. No, sir. But if I drop something, I pick it up. Every time. The room went still. Most applicants would have apologized until their voice cracked. She had chosen defiance wrapped in politeness. Maggie, watching from the doorway, raised her brows as if to say, this one's different. Charlotte stacked the rescued papers, smoothed them, and set them neatly on his desk. Her dress was simple navy, not designer. The heels on her shoes were scuffed, as if they had walked more subway stairs than gala carpets. She took the chair across from him, shoulders squared despite her nerves. Ned skimmed the resume. Community college degree, work as a receptionist at a dental office, side shifts at a coffee shop, nothing that belonged in a boardroom overlooking Bryant Park. "You've never supported an executive of this scale," he said. "No," she admitted, "but I've kept offices running on fewer resources than this company wastes in a day. I can learn. I don't give up easily." Her words were too plain to be rehearsed. Ned leaned back, studying her. He should have ended it there, thanked her politely, and saved them both the trouble. She was unpolished, unprepared, not the pedigree his family's firm demanded. Yet something in the tilt of her chin reminded him of Maggie's warning. Maybe it was the way Charlotte had steadied herself after dropping everything, or the way she spoke of persistence as if it were muscle memory. Silence stretched. Charlotte waited, not shrinking, not filling the air with nervous chatter. Maggie broke it. 1 week, trial run. "We're drowning out there, Ned, and she looks like she can swim." His jaw tightened. He didn't like being cornered, even gently, but he respected Maggie's instincts, and something in Charlotte's eyes refused to release his own. Finally, he said, "Very well. 1 week. You'll sit at that desk outside my office. If you falter, you're done. Do you understand?" Charlotte nodded. "I understand." Maggie exhaled, relief hidden in her half-smile. Charlotte gathered her papers again, this time without dropping them, and left the room with measured steps. When the door closed, Ned turned toward the skyline. The city stretched gray and endless beyond the glass. He told himself it was practicality, not curiosity, that had stayed his hand. It would be only 7 days, he reminded himself. She wouldn't last that long. Behind every headline about his billions was a boy who had grown up under impossible expectations. Edward Harrington IV was not born into ease, though the world thought otherwise. His childhood was lined with tradition, strict tutors, and a father who believed failure was weakness. The elder Harrington's motto, perfection or nothing, hung in a frame above Ned's boyhood desk. Even at 10 years old, he was expected to read the Wall Street Journal before breakfast, to memorize market indices while other children played baseball. His mother had been his balance. She brought homemade cookies to study halls and played the piano on rainy afternoons. Her hands smelled of lavender. Her laughter softened the edges of his father's sternness. But she died too young, a sudden illness that left an echo in the house and a permanent tightness in Ned's chest. After that, the walls of expectation grew higher. By the time he inherited Harrington and Rowe, the company was already faltering. Digital competition sliced away advertising. Old loyalists clung to print like lifeboats. But revenue bled faster than subscriptions arrived. Ned doubled down on precision. If the industry was slipping, he would not allow his corner of it to be sloppy. What employees called harshness, he called survival. Yet even as he polished the office until it gleamed, cracks showed in morale. The hallways felt hushed. Conversations stopped when he walked past. Assistants left. Editors complained behind closed doors. And Maggie, his steady CFO, warned that no one could thrive under constant fear. He listened, but rarely changed. To bend was to risk collapse. Charlotte Pierce's world could not have been more different. She had grown up in Dayton, Ohio, the daughter of a mechanic and a school secretary. Life was modest, but warm. Her father died when she was 22, a sudden accident in a factory lot. From then on, she carried the weight of keeping her mother afloat. Her mother's arthritis worsened with the years, hands stiffening until even holding a pen brought pain. Charlotte worked reception at a dental clinic, then pulled late shifts at a coffee shop. Every paycheck went to rent, medication, and hope. She dreamed of stability, not luxury, a steady job with health benefits, something that let her pay for her mother's care without juggling 3 part-time roles. Moving to New York had been a gamble. She rented a small apartment in Queens with peeling paint and a stubborn radiator, telling herself it was temporary, a stepping stone to something better. When she walked into Harrington and Rowe, clutching her folder, she felt the weight of those years pressing at her back. She was not a woman of pedigree or polish, but she knew persistence. She had lived it. The staff around her reflected the mood of the company. Their faces carried weariness. Jokes were whispered, not spoken aloud. Morale sank further each time an assistant left in tears. No one dared decorate their cubicles anymore. The office looked as sterile as Ned's glass-walled corner, a museum of ambition without warmth. News traveled fast within those walls. Someone whispered that Eleanor Voss had been seen again at a gala uptown, dazzling as ever. Eleanor had once been Ned's fiancée, a match praised by society columns. Her family carried weight in old money circles, her presence polished his image. But she had broken it off years ago, citing his obsession with work. Still, her name lingered in gossip, a ghost of what might have been. Maggie Cole remained the one anchor of common sense. She walked the halls with steady steps, speaking kindly to staff, reminding them they mattered. Where Ned ruled by silence, Maggie ruled by listening. She believed the company still had heart left, if only its leader would let it show. Charlotte noticed details others missed. On her second morning, while sorting proofs stacked high on the assistant's desk, her eyes caught a line that didn't sit right. A tribute page for a decorated veteran had the wrong middle initial. The error was small, the kind most would skim past. But Charlotte felt her stomach tighten. She thought of her own father, his name carved into a modest headstone back home, and how it would have felt if someone had misprinted it in public. She traced the letters again, her green eyes narrowing, and realized no one else had marked the mistake. Heart pounding. She turned toward Ned's glass office. Through the pane, she could see him bent over contracts, pen poised like a weapon. She knew how easily his temper sliced. Maggie's warning about morale echoed in her head, but the thought of letting that tribute run wrong gnawed at her. Charlotte lifted the page, walked toward the office, and pressed her lips together, knowing one wrong word might cost her even this chance. Most assistants stayed silent when something was wrong. Charlotte Pierce was not most assistants. She stood outside Ned Harrington's glass office, the tribute page trembling slightly in her hand. The error was only a single letter, the wrong middle initial for a decorated veteran. Yet, it felt like a crack in a gravestone, a wound no one else had seen. Through the glass, Ned was writing in bold strokes, his attention buried in contracts. He looked untouchable. Charlotte's heart thudded in her chest. A mistake like this should have been caught long before proofs reached her desk. Yet here it was, waiting to be bound, printed, and distributed across the country. She pressed the page against her folder and walked inside. Ned looked up, irritation already flickering across his expression. Yes, Charlotte forced her voice steady. This page, it has the wrong middle initial. If it goes to print, the family will notice. Silence filled the office. She braced for the cutting remark, the dismissal, the infamous look that had sent 11 others out the door before her. Instead, Ned reached for the page. He scanned it quickly, his jaw tightening. "And what do you suggest?" he asked coldly. Charlotte swallowed. "We can't ignore it. I can call the family, confirm the correction, and arrange for a new proof. If we act now, it won't delay the run. You'll call them." His tone carried disbelief. "Yes," she said. "It's their loved one's memory. They deserve to know someone cares enough to fix it." Ned's gaze lingered on her, measuring. Most assistants would have hidden behind procedure or waited for someone else to take responsibility. She had walked straight into the fire. He leaned back in his chair. "Do as you like, but if you cause a delay, you'll answer for it." Charlotte nodded. She took the page back, her fingers still trembling, and slipped out of the office. The number for the widow was scrawled in faded ink on the bottom of the file. Charlotte dialed it with care. The woman's voice cracked with age when she answered, carrying both dignity and grief. When Charlotte explained the error and promised a correction, there was a pause on the line. Then the woman whispered, "Thank you. My husband would have cared. He always said details matter." Charlotte's throat tightened. "They do," she said softly. "I'll make sure it's right." She drafted a formal apology on company letterhead, printing it with the precision of someone who knew words could wound or heal. She arranged for the corrected page to be typeset, then paid for a courier out of her own pocket when the budget line came back denied. The man arrived within the hour, a weathered messenger who carried packages as if they were treasure. By evening, the corrected proof sat ready. Charlotte delivered it to the production floor herself, checking twice that it was queued for the next print run. Her shoes pinched, her hands were ink-smudged, but she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Back upstairs, Ned noticed her return. "Well," he asked. "It's fixed," she said simply. He expected excuses, maybe panic, certainly a complaint about overtime. Instead, she stood calm, her green eyes steady, as if the ordeal had only strengthened her. Ned frowned. He had seen plenty of assistants scramble under pressure, but rarely with this kind of quiet competence. He was unsettled by the lack of fear in her face. The next morning, a call came to his office. Maggie transferred it in with raised brows. "It's for you, but not about you," she mouthed. Ned picked up, his voice clipped. "Harrington." On the other end, the widow spoke. Her tone was gentle, carrying the kind of gratitude that could not be faked. She thanked him for correcting the tribute page. She praised Charlotte by name, saying how kind and respectful she had been. Ned sat still, listening. His eyes shifted to the glass wall, where Charlotte was sorting papers with careful focus. For a long moment, he didn't speak. The widow assumed his silence was humility. When the call ended, he remained at his desk, unsettled. He could not remember the last time a client had thanked one of his assistants rather than him. Maggie appeared in the doorway, her coffee in hand. "You look like you've swallowed something sharp," she said. Ned didn't answer. His thoughts were tangled, circling around the green-eyed woman outside his office who had taken responsibility for a mistake she hadn't made. She hadn't asked for permission, hadn't sought credit. She had simply acted. For the rest of the day, Charlotte carried on quietly. She reorganized the inbox, straightened the proofing queue, and kept her head down. Yet her presence seemed to shift the air. Staff who usually avoided the assistant's desk stopped by, asking small questions, leaving notes. The hush of fear loosened, just slightly. That evening, when the office thinned, Ned lingered by the glass wall, watching Charlotte pack her folder. She didn't rush, she didn't shrink, and for the first time in months, he found himself without a sharp word. The company's annual gala was less than 24 hours away, and everything was falling apart. The event had been Ned Harrington's brainchild. A polished evening meant to dazzle donors and remind the city that Harrington and Rowe still carried weight in the cultural world. Tickets cost more than most assistants' monthly rent. The guest list glittered with CEOs, and the press had promised coverage. Every detail was supposed to reinforce prestige, but prestige was fragile. By mid-morning, the vendor delivering the floral centerpieces canceled, citing a shipping disaster. The designer responsible for the stage backdrop called, with news that the canvas had ripped while being mounted, and the caterer, hearing rumors of a possible strike in the print plant, threatened to withdraw unless additional deposits were wired immediately. The office spiraled into panic. Staff whispered about disaster, about reputations ruined. For Ned, it was a knife poised above the company's last shred of credibility. Charlotte Pierce stood in the center of the storm, watching people run in circles. Fear seemed to echo through the marble halls, louder than the phones that rang unanswered. She could see the edges of exhaustion in Maggie's face and the growing tension in Ned's shoulders. If this night collapsed, so would his already fragile standing with the board. She pressed her palms flat against her folder, steadying herself. "I'll take the backdrop," she said to no one in particular. The words slipped out before she could second-guess them. Someone laughed. What are you going to do? Stitch it back together?" But Charlotte had already pulled out her phone. She knew a high school art teacher from her Queens neighborhood who had once mentioned needing volunteer hours for her students. Within an hour, a group of teenagers armed with scissors, tape, and bright spirits arrived at the gala hall. Their chatter filled the cavernous space, replacing panic with possibility. The ripped canvas was beyond repair, but Charlotte saw possibility where others saw failure. She thought of her mother's quilts, the ones patched together from scraps of fabric saved through lean years. Patterns born from necessity had become symbols of warmth. Charlotte called her mother, asked if she could borrow the community quilts that neighbors had stitched for fundraisers. By late afternoon, boxes arrived at the loading dock, each one filled with color and history, squares sewn from baby clothes, work shirts, and church dresses now became the backdrop for a Manhattan gala. The volunteers draped the quilts across frames, layering them into a patchwork wall that pulsed with life. The sterile stage transformed into something human, something alive with story. When Ned walked into the hall, he froze. The chandeliers above glittered, but his eyes went to the backdrop, a riot of stitched squares that clashed with every sleek plan he had paid for. His jaw tensed. "What is this?" he demanded. Charlotte turned, cheeks flushed, hair slipping loose from its pins. "It's what we have," she said evenly. "It's warm, it's honest, and it's ready in time." Maggie, standing nearby, folded her arms. "Better than an empty stage. Ned." He said nothing, only moved closer, studying the quilts. The fabric smelled faintly of lavender and starch, of homes where hands had worked late into the night. It was imperfect, it was unscripted, and it unsettled him. That evening, the gala began under heavy expectations. Guests arrived in black tie, polished shoes tapping against marble. They sipped champagne, looked around for flaws, and prepared to judge. Ned stood rigid near the entrance, ready to absorb criticism that could slice deeper than any business deal. But something unexpected happened. Instead of frowning at the quilts, guests moved closer. They touched the fabric, traced the seams with careful fingers, and asked where it had come from. Stories spilled about community, about resilience, about the art of stitching broken pieces into beauty. A well-known author dabbed her eyes, murmuring that her grandmother had quilted during the Depression. A banker who rarely smiled told a student volunteer that his mother's quilts had kept him warm in childhood winters. The gala hall, once designed for sterile prestige, hummed with human memory. Ned watched, bewildered, as donors lingered longer at the backdrop than at the champagne tower. They weren't praising luxury. They were remembering home. Charlotte moved quietly through the room, making sure the students had water, that the boxes of borrowed quilts were handled with care. She wasn't angling for attention. She wasn't performing. She was serving, the same way she had served at the dental clinic, the coffee shop, and her mother's apartment. By the end of the night, pledges totaled higher than in years past. Guests praised the authentic touch, the refreshing sincerity. The press ran photos of the quilts, calling the gala unexpectedly moving. Ned stood at the edge of it all, shoulders tight, unable to shake the feeling that something had shifted beneath him. He had planned for elegance and perfection. She had given him warmth and imperfection, and it had worked. His gaze found Charlotte across the room. She was laughing softly with one of the students, a quilt draped over her arm, unaware that the most powerful people in the city were talking about her work. Ned's jaw tightened. She had rewritten the script of his gala, and it had worked. The star columnist was known for words that cut. That morning, his anger found a new target. The newsroom had barely woken when Richard Calderon stormed through the doors. He was the kind of writer who sold subscriptions with every sentence, his reputation legendary, his ego heavier than the awards on his shelf. His columns could ruin reputations overnight. Staff both admired and feared him, moving aside as if a storm front had entered the building. Today he wore a charcoal coat, draped casually over his arm, and a pale cashmere sweater that likely cost more than a month's rent in Queens. His voice rang sharp across the office. "Who did this?" he demanded, lifting his sleeve. Dark liquid stains spread across the cashmere, the unmistakable mark of coffee gone astray. "This sweater was imported from Milan. Do you have any idea what it costs?" The interns froze. A junior editor stammered apologies, though he hadn't been near the accident. The room seemed to shrink under Calderon's fury. Charlotte Pierce heard the commotion from her desk outside Ned's office. She stood, heart pounding, and walked toward the columnist. Around him, staff looked ready to vanish into the floor. "It was me," she said, though she hadn't touched his sweater. Her voice was steady. "I'll make it right." Calderon's eyes narrowed. Do you even know how to clean cashmere? Or will you toss it into some laundromat machine and shrink it to doll size?" Charlotte kept her gaze calm. "I know a specialist cleaner, 2 blocks from here. They'll take it now. Have it spotless by this afternoon. And I'll order you a replacement. Same brand, same color, monogrammed if you prefer." The room stilled. People glanced at one another, stunned. Calderon blinked, thrown off balance by her composure. "You'll replace it," he said, his tone almost mocking. "Yes," Charlotte answered. "Your time is valuable. You shouldn't have to worry about dry cleaning. Let me handle it." She lifted the stained sweater gently from his arms, folding it as if it were silk. Then she turned to an intern. "Please run this to Silverleaf Cleaners. Tell them it's urgent. I'll cover the cost." The intern, wide-eyed, bolted out the door with the package. Charlotte then pulled out her phone, searching quickly for the boutique where Calderon favored his wardrobe. She placed an order, added a discreet monogram, and arranged rush delivery. She confirmed it would arrive before noon. Her voice on the call was calm, professional, decisive. When she ended the call, she looked at Calderon. "You'll have the replacement within hours. The original will be returned this evening. In the meantime, if you'd like to work from your office, I'll send someone to bring you coffee that hasn't been spilled." The words were gentle, but the undertone was clear tantrums would not be necessary. Calderon's mouth opened, then closed. He was unused to being managed, especially by someone new, someone without pedigree. He glanced around at the silent office. Dozens of eyes watched. "At last," he muttered. "Efficient." Charlotte inclined her head. "That's my job." She returned to her desk, her cheeks flushed but her steps steady. The staff exhaled as if released from a held breath. Whispers rose, admiration tucked behind disbelief. From his glass office, Ned had seen it all. His hand rested on the edge of his desk, fingers drumming once before stilling. He had expected chaos, groveling, excuses. Instead, Charlotte had diffused the storm with calm authority. When the replacement sweater arrived, neatly boxed with tissue paper, Charlotte carried it herself to Calderon's office. She placed it on his desk without flourish. "Here you go," she said. "Try it on. If it doesn't fit perfectly, I'll have it tailored today." Calderon stared at the box, then at her. Something shifted in his expression, not warmth, but reluctant respect. That afternoon, he walked through the newsroom wearing the new sweater. He paused by Charlotte's desk, every eye on him. Anne cleared his throat. "Thank you," he said stiffly, "for handling it." The room froze again, but for a different reason. Richard Calderon never thanked assistants. He barely acknowledged them. Charlotte smiled politely. "You're welcome?" He moved on, leaving a trail of astonished faces. Inside his office, Ned sat back in his chair. The air in the newsroom felt lighter. Fear had not driven this outcome. Respect had. And it hadn't come from his authority. It had come from hers. He stared at the glass wall, the reflection of himself looking back. For the first time, Ned wondered if fear wasn't the only way to lead. One wrong calendar entry, and a multi-million-dollar meeting was about to collapse. Charlotte Pierce realized the mistake at 8:42 a.m., her coffee untouched, her stomach hollow. She had entered the lender's appointment into the system for Thursday at 10. The file in her hand proved it was scheduled for Wednesday at 9 this morning. By now, the lenders were likely already waiting downtown, expecting Ned Harrington and his executive team. Her throat tightened. Ned's reputation for firing assistants over minor errors was legendary. This wasn't minor. This was catastrophic. She grabbed the thick briefing packets she had prepared still sitting on her desk and bolted for the elevator. The city streets blurred around her as she sprinted to the subway, weaving through the rush-hour crowd. The folder dug into her side, but she clutched it as if it carried her future. On the train, she rehearsed her words. No excuses. No shifting blame. She would face the lenders herself before Ned arrived. If she could show them respect, maybe there would still be a chance. By 9:06, she burst into the marble lobby of the financial firm. Her hair clung damply to her temples, her breath ragged. Security eyed her warily until she produced her badge and appointment papers. Then she climbed the stairs 2 at a time, praying she wasn't already too late. Inside the conference room, 3 suited men sat stiffly at the table, checking their watches. Their expressions carried the cool disdain of people accustomed to being courted, not kept waiting. Charlotte steadied herself. "Gentlemen," she began, voice still catching, "the mistake is mine. I entered the appointment for the wrong day. Mr. Harrington is on his way. In the meantime, I wanted to make sure you had the briefing packets." She placed one in front of each man, aligning them carefully, as if order could substitute for apology. "This error doesn't reflect our respect for your time. I take full responsibility." The eldest of the 3, a silver-haired man with rimless glasses, studied her. For a long moment, the silence pressed heavy. Then he flipped open the packet, scanning the pages. "These are thorough," he said at last. "More detailed than most we receive." Relief loosened her chest, but she kept her posture straight. By 9:22, Ned strode into the room, his expression sharp enough to cut glass. He saw Charlotte standing at the end of the table, the lenders already paging through the documents. He caught her eye, a question flashing in his gray gaze. She gave the faintest nod, steady but contrite. The meeting began, tension still humming. Ned delivered his presentation with crisp authority, outlining projections, guarantees, and safeguards. The lenders questioned, probed, challenged. Charlotte kept quiet at the back of the room, her hands folded, willing the walls not to close in. At the end, the silver-haired man leaned back. "Mistakes happen. What matters is how they're handled. Your assistant faced us directly, admitted fault, and provided material that was both clear and useful. That speaks well for your company." Ned's brows lifted, ever so slightly. Praise for an assistant in this kind of room was rare. He inclined his head. "We value accountability," he said. The lenders exchanged glances, then one nodded. Credit line extended. "We'll move forward." Charlotte let out a breath so quiet only she could hear it. Afterward, in the corridor, Ned stopped her. His jaw was tight, but his words were even. "You nearly cost us everything this morning." "Yes, sir," she said, "and I'll never let it happen again." She handed him a folded sheet of paper. He frowned, opening it. Inside was a drafted checklist fail-safes for scheduling, color-coded reminders, double confirmation calls. "I started it on the train," she explained. "Not just for me, for everyone. If we use it company-wide, this kind of mistake won't happen again." Ned stared at the page, then at her. She was still flushed from the sprint, her shoes scuffed, hair falling loose. Yet her eyes met his with unflinching honesty. Instead of the anger that usually surged, something else stirred respect, reluctant but undeniable. Back at headquarters, Charlotte typed the checklist formally, distributed copies to department heads, and pinned one above her desk. No one asked her to. She simply did. The office felt different that afternoon. Editors glanced at her with something like gratitude. Maggie passed her desk, tapped the paper pinned there, and smiled. Charlotte tried not to let her hands shake as she filed the next round of proofs. Inside his office, Ned sat motionless, the checklist in front of him. He knew he should have fired her. 12 assistants before her had gone for less. But instead, he found himself wondering what it meant to have someone who not only admitted mistakes but turned them into systems of strength. For the first time, the steel around his standards felt less like armor and more like a cage. He rubbed his forehead, exhaled slowly, and told himself he would deal with the implications later. But as relief softened his jaw, Eleanor Voss walked into the lobby. She was supposed to be invisible, yet in that moment she stood between Ned and his past. The lobby buzzed with afternoon light when Eleanor Voss arrived, heels clicking against the marble like a metronome of confidence. Cameras followed her in society, reporters eager to capture the return of a woman whose name still carried power in the city's social columns. Her blonde hair was perfectly set, her smile sharp, her dress tailored to perfection. She did not glance at the receptionist or the staff who paused to watch. Her eyes went straight to Ned, who had just stepped out of the elevator. "Edward," she said, voice warm with practiced affection. "It's been too long." Ned's jaw tightened. Around them, flashes popped, the scene already feeding the rumor mill. Eleanor reached for his arm, leaning close, her voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. "I thought perhaps we might catch up. Lunch or dinner, if you prefer. You must miss how we worked as a pair." Charlotte stood at her desk, frozen. She had read Eleanor's name in the society pages, heard whispers of the broken engagement. Seeing her now felt like watching two worlds collide, Ned's cold precision against a past wrapped in glamour. Ned drew a breath, ready to dismiss Eleanor sharply, but Charlotte saw the cameras closing in. His rejection, if public, would spark a flurry of speculation. Instinct overrode hesitation. "Mr. Harrington," Charlotte said quickly, rising to her feet. "Your 2 o'clock is arriving early. I've set the conference room. It was a lie. No one was scheduled." But the words gave him a way out. Ned turned toward her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Then he nodded once, decisive. "Thank you, Miss Pierce. If you'll excuse me, Eleanor." The dismissal was polite but firm. Eleanor's smile faltered. She glanced at Charlotte, her gaze cool and appraising, before retreating under the camera's glare. The reporters murmured, disappointed that no drama had unfolded. The moment dissolved, but Charlotte felt her pulse racing. She had stepped directly into fire, risking his anger. Yet, when she sat down again, Ned passed her desk and paused. "Quick thinking," he murmured, low enough for only her to hear. She looked up, startled, but he had already moved on. That evening, when the building emptied and silence reclaimed the halls, Charlotte lingered to finish filing. She was gathering her coat when faint music drifted from deeper within the office. Curious, she followed the sound. The notes were soft, halting at first, then gathering strength. Down a corridor rarely used, she found a door ajar. Inside stood a small room, long forgotten, with an upright piano against the wall. Its surface was scratched, keys yellowed, but the sound was warm. Ned sat on the bench, back straight, hands moving with restrained grace. He played without sheet music, a melody both tender and mournful. Charlotte froze in the doorway. This was not the sharp man who cut down errors with a glance. This was someone else, someone carrying weight he rarely showed. His shoulders, always squared in command, now bent slightly. His face, usually composed, was softened by concentration. When he finished, he rested his hands on the keys, head bowed. The silence that followed felt heavier than the music. Charlotte cleared her throat gently. "I didn't know you played." Ned turned, startled. For a moment, she saw defensiveness flash across his features. Then he sighed. "My mother taught me. She used to say music was the only thing my father couldn't correct." There was no sharpness in his tone, only memory, threaded with sorrow. Charlotte stepped into the room, her voice quiet. "It's beautiful." He shrugged, as if embarrassed. "It's nothing." But she could see it wasn't nothing. It was a crack in the armor, a glimpse of the man beneath the CEO. She wanted to ask more, but she sensed questions might close the door again. Instead, she sat on a chair nearby, letting the silence stretch comfortably. For a long time, they didn't speak. The hum of the city outside filtered faintly through the windows, blending with the echo of the last notes. At last, Ned rose, smoothing his jacket back into place, his mask sliding on again. "You should head home, Miss Pierce. It's late." Charlotte nodded, standing. But as she walked back to her desk, her thoughts spun. She had seen the exhaustion in his face, the kind that no amount of money or power could erase. He wasn't arrogant for the sake of cruelty. He was carrying too much, holding too tightly to standards that left no room for weakness. And in the stillness, she feared she had begun to care. "Every man has a price," Trent said. He believed Charlotte Pierce's was $150,000. The first time she met him, the rival CEO walked into the Harrington and Row lobby with the ease of someone who considered every room already his. Tall, silver at the temples. His smile was polished, but it didn't reach his eyes. He carried power like perfume, designed to linger. Ned had gone tense the instant Trent's name appeared on the visitor log. The two men had circled each other for years, competitors in the ruthless world of media, each waiting for the other to stumble. But it wasn't Ned whom Trent wanted to see first. He stopped at Charlotte's desk, leaning in as though they were old acquaintances. "Miss Pierce, isn't it?" His voice was low, conspiratorial. "I've been watching how you handle chaos here. Impressive? Very impressive." Charlotte sat straighter. "Can I help you, Mr. Kincaid?" His grin sharpened. "Yes, I want to offer you something better than this desk, better than this chaos. Executive assistant to my office, $150,000 a year, full elder care benefits, a staff of your own." The words landed heavy. Elder care benefits. He had done his research. Her mother's illness wasn't in any file. That meant he'd gone digging. Charlotte forced her hands not to clench. "That's generous," she said carefully. "Not generous," he corrected. "Practical. You're wasting yourself here. Harrington will burn you out and discard you. I'm offering you a ladder, not a treadmill." Before she could answer, Ned appeared. His voice was ice. "Stay away from my staff. Kincaid." Trent straightened slowly, his smirk unshaken. "Your staff. Interesting word. Ned. Last I checked, loyalty can't be bought, but it can be rented." The tension between them drew every eye in the lobby. Trent finally stepped back, but not before giving Charlotte a look that said the offer was real, waiting, and tailored for her. That afternoon, news broke Trent had filed a lawsuit, claiming Harrington and Row had breached contract in a joint project from years back. The board wavered, murmuring about settlements, about Ned's hard edges costing them allies. Panic whispered through the offices. Charlotte worked late, combing through archives, determined to find something, anything that could steady the company. The basement smelled of dust and ink, boxes stacked like tombstones of forgotten deals. Midnight came, but she pressed on, her flashlight beam cutting through shadows. At last, buried under misfiled correspondence, she found a slim folder stamped with the year of the disputed project. Inside were letters, agreements, drafts signed in ink. Proof that Trent's claim was exaggerated, maybe fabricated. Her chest lifted with hope. But as she turned another page, a smaller envelope slid out. It was older, the paper yellowed, the handwriting careful. Across the front, in neat block letters, "For Edward, when you doubt." Charlotte hesitated. This wasn't business. It was personal. Still, the envelope had been hidden with the file, almost as if waiting. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter. The handwriting was Ned's father's, unmistakably precise. "Standards matter, son, but so does mercy. Do not forget one without the other. I failed often. You must do better." Charlotte sank onto a crate, the words heavy in her hands. She had seen Ned's perfectionism, the armor he wore like a second skin. Now she held proof that even his father, so often painted as merciless, had known the cost of living without grace. The contrast shook her. Trent offered security, money, relief for her mother's care. Ned offered nothing so clear, only impossible standards that left her exhausted yet alive with purpose. Both men were asking her to choose, in different languages, power or trust, safety or something harder to define. By the time she left the archive room, dawn was bruising the sky. She carried the folder, the evidence that could save the company, and the letter, the evidence that Ned was not who he seemed. Her hands shook because she knew both men were asking her to choose. She could have walked away. Instead, She put her defiance on paper. The morning after her sleepless night in the archives, Charlotte Pierce arrived at the office pale with exhaustion, clutching both the crucial file and the letter she had found. Ned Harrington met her in the corridor. His gray eyes went first to the folder in her hands. Relief softened his shoulders for half a breath before he stiffened again, as if caught in the act of feeling grateful. "You found it?" he said. "Yes." Charlotte answered simply. "It's enough to counter Kincaid's claim." Ned exhaled, then surprised her by blurting, "You've done more in weeks than others did in years. I'll see that you're properly compensated. Salary adjustment, benefits, you deserve." She froze, something in her chest nodding. "This isn't about money, Mr. Harrington." He blinked. Few people had ever interrupted him. "What is it about then?" "Respect," she said quietly. "For the people who keep this company alive." His jaw tightened. "You think I don't respect my employees?" "I think," Charlotte replied. "Careful. That fear and respect aren't the same." The words hung in the air, dangerous and true. Later that afternoon, tension cracked. A minor delay on a proof triggered one of Ned's infamous snaps. His voice, sharp as glass, lashed across the newsroom. Staff shrank back. Charlotte stood still, face pale. When the storm passed, she gathered her things, ready to leave for good. Maggie caught her at the elevator. "Don't quit like this," she urged. "Not when you've come this far." Charlotte hesitated. Walking away would be easier, safer. But the letter in her bag, the words from Ned's father, burned like a hidden ember. Standards with mercy. She couldn't ignore it. That evening, instead of packing up, she sat at her desk long after the lights dimmed. She opened a blank document and began to type. Her fingers moved with urgency, shaping her frustration into vision. She outlined ways to rebuild trust, transparent scheduling, collaborative decision-making, space for staff to admit mistakes without fear. She wrote about loyalty earned, not demanded. She wrote about compassion as a strength, not a weakness. By midnight, it was 5 pages long. She titled it simply, "Toward Humane Leadership at Harrington and Row." She printed 2 copies. One she slipped into Ned's inbox. The other she left in the staff break room, folded and anonymous. Ned discovered his copy at the end of another punishing day. He carried it absent-mindedly into the piano room, intending to skim before discarding. But as he read, the words stopped him cold. Fear breeds silence. Silence breeds mistakes. If you want standards to last, you must give people space to stand with you, not beneath you. He read every sentence, the lines cutting closer than any rival's attack. This wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was a mirror, showing him a version of himself he didn't want to see but couldn't deny. He sat at the piano bench, the memo spread across the keys. His hands hovered but didn't play. The words echoed louder than music. Meanwhile, in the break room, the other copy began to circulate. A copy editor read it first, then slipped it to a proofreader. By dawn, quiet whispers threaded the office. "Have you seen it?" "She's right." Managers who had once kept their heads down found courage in the document. It spoke what they had all felt, but never dared to say aloud. When Ned entered the building the next morning, he sensed the shift immediately. The usual hush of fear was tempered with something different, hope, fragile but undeniable. He realized the memo had spread. Charlotte arrived with her head high, though her hands trembled as she placed files on her desk. She had no idea how he would respond. He could fire her for insubordination, erase her words with a single command. But instead, Ned closed his office door and read the memo again. Alone, by the piano. He whispered the line that had struck deepest standards with mercy. The board would meet in the morning, and neither of them knew if there would be a company left to fight for. In the boardroom, legacy and livelihood hung by a thread. The long mahogany table gleamed under the lights, lined with directors whose faces carried both fatigue and calculation. Ned Harrington sat at the head, his expression as still as stone. Beside him, Maggie stacked files, calm but firm. while across the room murmurs rose about Kincaid's lawsuit, the company's bleeding reputation, and the possibility of selling. Trent's offer lingered in the air like a poison. It promised escape, security, relief from years of pressure. But selling would also mean surrendering Harrington and Rowe's name, his family's name, to a rival who would twist it for profit. Charlotte sat just outside the room, not permitted a seat at the table, but close enough to hear fragments through the half-open door. Her hands tightened on her folder. Inside lay the memo she had written, the one that had already spread through staff like wildfire. She knew it was audacious to hope those words could matter here, in the company of suits and shareholders. The debate grew heated. Some argued for compromise, others for cutting losses. Ned remained silent, his gaze lowered, until at last one director said bluntly, "Edward, you've led us with an iron fist. It brought results once, now it's breaking us. Something must change, either leadership or ownership." The words should have stung. Instead, Ned felt an odd stillness. He thought of the piano room, the letter from his father, the memo Charlotte had left in his inbox. Standards with mercy. The phrase refused to let him go. He rose slowly, drawing every eye. "I will not sell to Trent Kincaid," he said. His voice carried no edge, only clarity. "This company was built on my family's name, and it will not be handed to a man who values only profit, but I will change how we lead." Maggie raised her brows, surprised but supportive. Ned held up the memo. "This plan was not mine. It came from someone who has seen this place with fresh eyes and told the truth we've avoided. Fear breeds silence. Silence breeds mistakes. If we want to survive, we must build trust." The room rustled with surprise. No one had expected him to cite an assistant's words. He continued, effective immediately. "We will implement humane leadership practices, open communication, transparent scheduling, accountability with compassion. I will personally fund a scholarship in the name of the veteran's widow, whose trust we nearly lost, to prove we mean what we say." There was a pause, then a slow nod from one of the older directors. Another leaned back, exhaling. The tide shifted. When the vote came, the board backed Ned by the narrowest margin. But enough. The company would remain Harrington and Rowe. Afterward, in the newsroom, Ned stood before his staff. The air was tight, wary. He had addressed them before, but always with precision that left no room for warmth. Today was different. "I've demanded excellence," he began, "but I've confused fear with respect. That ends now. Mistakes will still have consequences. Standards remain, but we will temper them with mercy." Maggie watched him closely, pride flickering in her eyes. Charlotte, standing near the back, felt her chest tighten. To hear him use those words aloud was almost unreal. Then Ned added something none expected. "To avoid conflicts of interest, Miss Pierce will report to Ms. Cole moving forward. Her contributions have been invaluable, but no one person should be tied solely to me. We work as a team." Charlotte's breath caught. It was a practical move, maybe even wise, but she felt the shift like a door closing. Still, when she met his gaze across the room, she saw something unspoken there, not distance, but promise. Later, in his office, when the crowd had dispersed, Ned found her waiting by the door. He hesitated, then spoke softly. "You change me, Charlotte. I don't say that easily. I want you near, but on terms that let you thrive, not just survive." Her throat tightened. She nodded, unable to find words. That night, alone again at the piano, Ned pressed his hands to the keys without playing. He thought of his father's stern lessons, of the years he had lived armored by perfection, and of the woman who had walked into his world with green eyes and steady defiance. For the first time, he laid some of that armor down. For once, winning meant surrender. The lawsuit dissolved like ink in water, but the real victory was quieter. Charlotte's midnight find had given Harrington and Rowe the leverage to dismantle Trent Kincaid's claim piece by piece. His lawyers withdrew, muttering about technical misunderstandings, but the damage he intended never landed. For the first time in weeks, the company exhaled, Yet the survival of Harrington and Rowe was not just about contracts. It was about culture. Ned began where it mattered most, the plant. For years, the factory workers had labored under schedules that demanded too much and gave too little. Now, safety upgrades were ordered, shifts reorganized, and voices that had long gone unheard found a place at the table. A veteran press operator said quietly, "Feels like someone finally sees us." And word spread. Inside headquarters, change unfolded in unexpected ways. The quilts that had once been a desperate substitute for a ruined backdrop were rehung in the lobby, this time intentionally. Guests stopped to admire them. Staff pointed out squares they had stitched, and the patchwork became a symbol, flaws joined together to make something whole. On Friday evenings, when the halls emptied, music sometimes drifted from the piano room. At first, Ned played alone, then, gradually, others joined an editor with a violin, a copyist with a soft tenor voice. What began as a private ritual turned into an informal tradition. Staff stayed late not from fear, but for music. They began calling it Piano Fridays, and laughter followed notes down the corridors. Eleanor Voss, once a shadow at the edge of Ned's life, bowed out with quiet dignity. The tabloids spun stories, but she offered no scandal, no barbed comments. Her absence left room for something gentler to grow. Trent, frustrated by his failed lawsuit, turned his focus elsewhere, circling new prey. Harrington and Rowe no longer looked vulnerable, and he knew better than to fight a company that had found both strength and solidarity. Most remarkable was the shift in the people. Staff who had once whispered about leaving rediscovered pride. Mistakes were admitted without terror, corrected without humiliation. Maggie joked that the newsroom finally sounded like a place where ideas breathe instead of choke. For Charlotte, the change was tangible. Her checklist pinned above her desk became a shared tool. Her quiet defiance had sparked something she never intended, a movement inside walls that once silenced. The proof of it came at the foundation dinner. The ballroom shimmered with light. But the atmosphere was different from the sterile galas of before. Community tables mixed with executives. The widow of the veteran sat near the front, honored with a scholarship in her husband's name. And in the midst of it all, Charlotte's mother arrived, leaning gently on her cane, her eyes wide with wonder. She had worried she would feel out of place among glittering gowns and tuxedos. Instead, she was welcomed with dignity. Staff greeted her warmly. Quilts displayed nearby bore stories like hers, and the scholarship announcement brought her to tears. Charlotte sat beside her, hand clasped around her mother's. She realized this was what mercy looked like, not grand gestures, but small doors opened, quiet respect granted. Across the room, Ned stood near the stage, his gaze steady on them. He had surrendered something of himself to make this possible, and in that surrender found a peace he hadn't known he needed. The company still faced deadlines, still carried scars of past missteps, but the weight had shifted. Harrington and Rowe no longer felt like a fortress ruled by fear. It felt like a house rebuilt, breathing again, one careful stone at a time. The house Ned had built on fear was learning how to breathe again. On a winter evening by the East River, two lives paused at the edge of something new. The city hummed behind them, but here the water carried its own rhythm, slow, cold, steady. Lamps along the walkway flickered against the dusk, casting pale halos onto the pavement. Charlotte Pierce wrapped her scarf tighter, her breath visible in the crisp air. Beside her, Ned Harrington walked in silence, hands clasped behind his back, as if weighing words before setting them free. The company had endured its storm. The lawsuit was gone, the staff steadier, the board newly cautious but supportive. Yet this walk was not about contracts or numbers. It was about what remained after survival. Ned stopped near the railing, the river moving dark and sure beneath them. From his pocket, he pulled a silver fountain pen, the one he had carried since his early years at the firm. Its cap was worn smooth from use, its nib still sharp. "This pen built my reputation," he said quietly. "Every contract I ever signed, every note I ever scrawled, it began here. I thought it symbolized control. He turned the pen once in his hand, then set it gently into a small donation box placed for the newsroom's scholarship fund. The gesture was simple, almost unnoticed in the winter twilight, yet it felt weighty. Now it belongs to everyone, he added. Standards don't live in one hand. They live in the house we've rebuilt. Charlotte watched him, her chest tightening. In his release of that pen, she saw what she had hoped but never dared expect: humility. She reached into her own bag and pulled out her dented notebook, its corners frayed, its pages filled with crossed-out reminders and hastily scribbled checklists. She pressed it against her chest. "I'll keep this," she said, "not because it's perfect, because it reminds me mistakes can teach us more than pride ever could." Their eyes met in the fading light. No declaration was needed. The promise forming between them was not born of conquest or surrender. It was something quieter, steadier. "I don't want ease," Charlotte said, her voice steady. "Not from you. I want us to keep challenging each other, to keep telling the truth even when it stings." Ned nodded. "No coddling," he agreed. "If I falter, you tell me. If you stumble, I'll steady you, not shield you." The cold wind pressed against them, but warmth bloomed in the space between. They began walking again, steps matching without effort. The city lights shimmered across the water, stretching long and uncertain, like paths still to be traveled. Charlotte's hand brushed the railing, then stilled. "When I first sat at that desk," she admitted, "I thought I wouldn't last a week. You made sure of it." Ned's mouth curved faintly. So did I. They laughed softly, the sound surprising both of them, cutting through the winter air. At the corner, where the walkway curved, Ned stopped once more. He faced her fully. No armor, no boardroom mask, only the man who had been shaped by impossible standards, and who was slowly learning to live with mercy. "I can't promise it will be easy," he said. Charlotte lifted her chin. "Good. Easy never lasts." For a moment, silence stretched, filled with river light and possibility. Then she slid her notebook back into her bag and slipped her gloved hand into his. And for the first time, Charlotte Pierce believed she had not just survived a week, but begun a life. At its heart, this story is not about a billionaire or an assistant. It is about the universal struggle between pride and humility, fear and trust. Edward Harrington believed perfection came only through pressure and control. Charlotte Pierce, with her clumsy honesty and quiet courage, showed him another truth: that strength is not diminished by kindness, and standards do not collapse when tempered with mercy. How often in our own lives do we cling to impossible expectations of others, of ourselves, only to find they leave us isolated? Fear may bring compliance, but it cannot bring loyalty. It is compassion that builds bridges, honesty that repairs mistakes, and forgiveness that allows us to begin again. Charlotte's resilience reminds us that even the smallest voice can change the atmosphere of an entire house. And Ned's surrender teaches that it is never too late to soften, to grow, to choose connection over control. For those of us who have lived long enough to carry both victories and regrets, this story is a gentle reminder. True legacy is not measured in wealth or power, but in the lives we touch with patience, dignity, and care. Here's a short and warm closing thank you with a call to action, tailored for your audience. Thank you so much for spending your time with us and listening to this story. If it touched your heart or gave you something to reflect on, we would be truly grateful if you showed your support. Please remember to like this video, share it with someone who might need a little encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Your kindness helps us keep telling the tales that matter.